The Call at Dawn. Hello everyone, and welcome back. Before we begin today's story, I want to take a moment to acknowledge each and every one of you who has joined me here. Wherever you are in the world right now, whether you're watching from a bustling city apartment, a quiet suburban home, or somewhere in between, your presence here means more than you know. Please take a moment to drop a comment and tell me what city or country you're watching from today. This story is one of family, of secrets buried deep, and of the moment when everything we thought we knew about the people closest to us shatters into pieces we never expected. The phone rang at 5:47 in the morning. I remember the exact time because I had just poured my first cup of coffee and was standing at the kitchen window, watching the first pale light of a January dawn creep across the frozen lawn. The clock above the stove, the one my wife Martha had bought at a flea market in 1992, was still stubbornly stuck on the number 6. I had meant to fix it for years, but somehow never found the time. Some things, I suppose, we learn to live with. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, a local area code, something from the Richmond region, but I didn't recognize it. In my younger days, a call at this hour would have meant only one thing: trouble. Something had gone wrong somewhere, and I was the one they needed to fix it. I had spent 25 years answering calls like that, first as a detective, then in the federal task force that didn't officially exist. I had thought those days were behind me. I answered anyway. "Is this Daniel Cross?" The voice on the other end was rough, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who had spent decades working outdoors. It carried a steadiness that suggested the speaker was trying very hard to stay calm, and not entirely succeeding. "My name is Harold Jenkins. I don't know you, sir, but I found a young woman down at the old railroad bridge on Creek Road about 30 minutes ago. She's in bad shape, sir. Real bad." My coffee mug hit the counter with a sharp crack. I didn't hear it shatter. Every nerve in my body locked onto the next words that came through the phone. "There was a piece of paper in her jacket pocket," Harold continued. "Waterproof paper, sealed in plastic. It had this number on it. Just the number and the word Dad. The world outside that word ceased to exist entirely." "What does she look like?" My voice came out steadier than I had any right to expect. "Old habits, old training. The parts of yourself that never truly leave, no matter how many years you spend trying to forget them." "Brown hair," Harold said. "Early 30s, maybe. She's wearing a research badge from the university. Sir, she's breathing, but she's not really conscious. I already called 911. Ambulance should be there in about 10 minutes. Don't let anyone move her," I said, already grabbing my coat from the hook by the door. "And Harold, don't leave her side. Not for a second." "Yes, sir." The steadiness in his voice told me he understood the weight of that request. He was a man who had seen enough of life to know when something wasn't right. The drive to Creek Road usually took 15 minutes. I made it in 9. The January air was like a blade against my face when I stepped out of my truck. Frost covered the grass in a white sheen, and the old railroad bridge loomed dark against the gray sky. Harold Jenkins was exactly where he said he would be, a heavy-set man in his late 60s, wearing a canvas jacket and work boots, kneeling beside a figure lying at the bottom of the embankment. My legs carried me down the slope before my mind could catch up. I knew who I was going to find. I had known since the moment Harold said the word Dad. But knowing and seeing are two different things, and what I saw at the bottom of that embankment nearly stopped my heart entirely. Emma. She was on her side, her brown hair tangled and matted against her cheek, her hand stretched out on the frozen grass as if she had been reaching for something and couldn't quite hold on. She was wearing the green jacket I had given her for her 30th birthday, the one with the university logo on the sleeve. Emma. My voice broke on her name in a way it hadn't broken since the night the doctors told me Martha was gone. Emma, I'm here. Dad's here. Her eyelids fluttered. A sound came from her throat, not quite a word, not quite a breath. Just a sound. She was alive. I pressed my fingers to her wrist and felt her pulse, fast, uneven, but present. Every beat felt like a gift I hadn't earned. That was when I noticed her wrists. Two thin bands of compressed tissue ran horizontally across both wrists, perfectly parallel. Clean, even marks. Not the torn skin of someone who had grabbed at something during a fall. These were the marks left by soft restraints, the kind used in controlled environments by people who knew exactly what they were doing. My throat tightened until I could barely breathe. Harold cleared his throat behind me. Before the ambulance gets here, I found something else. He produced a small Ziploc bag from his jacket pocket. Inside was a single button, small, dark, with a faint sheen that had no business being near a riverside embankment at sunrise. And I photographed the tire tracks up on the shoulder before I came down. Big vehicle, an SUV. They pulled off right at the guardrail and drove away. The ambulance arrived, its lights washing red and white across the frozen grass. As the paramedics came down the embankment, I kept my hand on Emma's shoulder until the last possible moment. Then I stood at the edge of the riverbank and looked down at the dark water below the bridge. Someone had driven here, opened a door, and left my daughter in the January cold. I pulled out my phone. My fingers moved to a number I hadn't dialed in 10 years. I stared at the screen for exactly 4 seconds, then pressed call. Richmond General Hospital smelled like antiseptic and that particular silence that only exists in places where people are waiting to find out if someone they love is going to be all right. I had walked these corridors before. 10 years ago, I had stood in a hallway that looked exactly like this one, the same pale green walls, the same humming fluorescent lights, and listened to a doctor explain in careful, measured language that the damage was too extensive and the timeline very short. That night, it had ended with me sitting alone in a plastic chair outside a room I couldn't bring myself to leave, holding Martha's hand until there was no longer any point in holding it. Walking through these doors again made my chest ache in a way I hadn't expected. Grief has a memory of its own, and it doesn't ask permission before it wakes up. The nurse outside the trauma bay was young, with tired eyes and a clipboard pressed to her chest. "Are you family?" she asked. "I'm her father," I said. She stepped aside. Emma was awake. Her eyes found my face the moment I came through the door, and something in them shifted. A wall that had been holding her together cracked just enough to let the pain underneath show through. Her lower lip trembled violently, and her fingers reached for me before I could reach the bed, grasping at the air. I closed the distance and took both her hands in mine. They were ice cold. "Dad!" Her voice was barely a thread of sound, rough and torn at the edges. "Dad, I'm here," I said, and my own voice dropped low and unsteady in a way I hadn't allowed in years. "You're safe. I promise you that." Tears spilled down her face and soaked into the pillow. She didn't sob. She was too exhausted for that. But her whole body shook with the effort of holding back what she couldn't fully hold back anymore. "They wanted the formula," she whispered. Each word cost her something. "The Alzheimer's treatment, everything I've worked on for 5 years. Philip took me to a facility. He said it was a new research site his family wanted to show me, the equipment they were offering to fund. A sound escaped her that wasn't quite a breath and wasn't quite a cry. It was something in between, something that had no name. It wasn't a research site. My jaw locked so hard I felt it in my back teeth. I kept my hands steady around hers because she needed them to be steady. They had documents ready, she continued. Transfer agreements, patent assignments. They wanted me to sign everything over to the formula, the research data, the clinical trial protocols, my name removed from the discovery entirely. Her eyes filled again, and a sob broke through, short and sharp. She pressed her lips together hard to stop the next one. 5 years, Dad. 5 years of my life. Did you sign anything? I asked. No. The word came out with a force that surprised us both. I didn't sign a single page. I told them they could do whatever they wanted to me. I wasn't going to hand them something that belongs to the patients who need it. I was about to speak when the door opened. The man who stepped through was in his early 30s, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark suit that fit the way expensive things fit people who have never thought about the cost. He was carrying white lilies still in the florist's paper. His face wore an expression of practiced concern, the kind I had spent 25 years learning to read. Mr. Cross, he said, his voice warm and well-modulated. I came as soon as I heard. This has been a terrible accident. How did you find out she was here? I asked. He didn't miss a beat. The hospital called the emergency contact on file. I looked at him steadily. Emma's phone is missing. She was brought in unconscious and unidentified except for a piece of paper with my number on it. The hospital has no emergency contact on file because she wasn't formally admitted when you arrived. I kept my voice conversational. So I'll ask you again, how did you know she was here? For exactly 1 second, something moved behind Philip Montgomery's eyes. Then it was gone, sealed over with the smooth surface of a man who had prepared for this. There must be some miscommunication, he said pleasantly. These things happen in stressful situations. He set the flowers on the table beside the door, unhurried, entirely at ease. If there's anything our family can do. There's nothing, I said. He gave a small, gracious nod and walked out. His footsteps were unhurried and even on the linoleum floor. The door swung shut. Emma's hand found my wrist and gripped it hard enough to hurt. He knew exactly when they found me, she said, her voice cracking. He knew before anyone called him. I know, I said. I stood and walked to the window. The January sky outside was flat white. My phone was already open, a single message typed and ready. Richmond General, 2nd floor. Come now. All of you. I sent it, put the phone in my pocket, and turned back to my daughter, who was watching me with eyes that were beginning slowly to understand that the man standing in her hospital room was not entirely who she had always believed him to be. There are things that cannot be faked. Not wounds, not dust, not the particular way a body carries evidence of what has been done to it, written into skin and fabric and the microscopic residue that transfers from one surface to another whether anyone intends it to or not. I had spent 25 years reading those things. In warehouses and back rooms and hospital corridors far grimmer than this one. And the body of my daughter lying in a bed on the 2nd floor of Richmond General was telling me a story that had nothing to do with an accident. Emma had fallen back into an exhausted sleep 20 minutes after Philip left. Her grip on my hand had loosened gradually, her breathing deepening, her face finally releasing some of the tension that had held it rigid since I walked through the door. I stayed exactly where I was, the chair pulled close to the left side of her bed, and I began to read. The marks on her wrists were the first thing, and the most obvious. 2 bands of compressed tissue, slightly reddened, running horizontally across both wrists at the same height. Not jagged. Not the torn skin of someone who had grabbed at something to break a fall. Even pressure, consistently applied over a period of time. The signature of soft restraints, the kind used in controlled environments by people who needed a subject immobilized without leaving obvious bruising. I had seen those marks before. I knew exactly what made them. The second thing was the dust on her clothing. Her jacket and the left knee of her pants carried a fine white residue that had the particular texture of quaternary ammonium compound, a heavy-duty disinfectant used in high-containment laboratory environments. By a safety level 2 and above. It wasn't the kind of cleaning product found in homes or standard office buildings. It wasn't even the kind used in general hospital wards. It was the kind used in spaces where contamination control was a legal requirement, where every surface was scrubbed on a documented schedule, where the air itself was filtered and recirculated through sealed systems. The third thing was under her fingernails. On her right hand, caught beneath 3 of her nails in small but unmistakable flecks, was paint. Dark blue. A very specific shade, almost navy, with a slight chemical sheen that indicated an epoxy-based coating of the type used on interior walls in industrial research facilities. Not house paint. Not the kind of blue you find in apartments or office buildings. The kind of blue that goes on walls designed to be hosed down. I thought of what Emma had said before she fell asleep. Blue, dark blue, like the old lab walls at Hopkins. She hadn't been describing a memory. She had been giving me a location. The 4th through 6th things I found within the next few minutes, her phone gone, her laptop bag gone, and the small emergency charger she always kept clipped to the inside of her jacket pocket gone as well. Whoever had taken her had been thorough. They hadn't left her with any device that could transmit a signal or record a conversation. Which was why the 7th thing hit me the way it did. I had noticed the waterproof paper in her jacket pocket, the one Harold had found at the bridge, the one with my number on it. But looking at the inside lining of her jacket more carefully now, I found where it had been stored. A small seam along the interior left pocket, hand-stitched in thread that was slightly newer than the surrounding fabric. Emma had sewn that compartment herself. Recently. My throat tightened until drawing breath required conscious effort. When Emma was 7 years old, I used to take her on what I called navigation exercises. Walks through the neighborhood where I would give her a starting point and tell her to find her way back to the house using only landmarks and the rules I had taught her. The most important rule, the one I had repeated until she could say it back to me in her sleep, was this: if you ever get lost, leave a mark that only I will recognize. I will always come looking. I will always find it. She had remembered. After 25 years, she had remembered. The 8th thing, the one that made my hands begin to shake for the first time since I had arrived at the bridge that morning, was the absence of her engagement ring. I hadn't noticed it immediately because I had been focused on her face and her wrists and her breathing. But looking at her left hand now, resting against the blanket, I could see the faint indentation on her ring finger where the ring had sat for nearly 2 years. And I could see that the ring was gone. Not lost. The indentation was too clean, too recent for the ring to have come off during a fall. It had been removed deliberately. I pulled out my phone and searched the model number I remembered from the evening Philip had proposed. I had taken a photograph of the receipt Emma left on the kitchen counter. A habit from years of documenting everything, though I hadn't known at the time why I was doing it. The search returned 3 results. The second one stopped my blood cold. The ring model had been manufactured in a limited run by a company called Sentinel Integrated Solutions, based in Northern Virginia. Their primary client base was not jewelers. It was corporate security firms and private investigation agencies. The ring's band contained a micro GPS transmitter embedded in the cast metal, invisible to the naked eye, undetectable without specialized equipment, that activated remotely when triggered by a paired device and transmitted location data at intervals of every 4 minutes. Philip Montgomery had known where Emma was every hour of every day for nearly 2 years. My phone buzzed against my palm. A message from a number stored under the initials RC. Dust type confirmed. Quaternary ammonium industrial grade. Virginia has 7 licensed BSL-2 facilities. Montgomery Med Group operates 2. One is their main campus on Route 9. The other is a research annex at Ridley Industrial Park listed as inactive in public filings but pulling commercial electricity at full capacity. I'm narrowing it down. Give me 90 minutes. Rex Calloway. 48 years old. The best technical analyst I had ever worked with. A man who could pull data from a system that had been wiped 3 times and find something useful in what was left. He had picked up my message and started working before I had even finished sending it. A doctor I didn't recognize appeared in the doorway. 50s, silver-haired, wearing a Montgomery Med Group lanyard that he hadn't bothered to tuck under his coat. He smiled at me with the practiced warmth of someone who had delivered a great deal of difficult news in pleasant tones. Mr. Cross, he said, I've been asked by the team at Montgomery Medical Center to assess whether your daughter might benefit from a transfer to our facility. We have a dedicated neurological unit that. No. The doctor's smile didn't waver. I understand the hesitation, but given the complexity of her presentation. My daughter is not being transferred anywhere, I said, standing up from the chair. I was taller than him by 3 inches, and I made no effort to soften the way I was looking at him. She is a patient of Richmond General Hospital, admitted through their emergency department, and she will remain under the care of their staff. If you are not on that staff, you do not have clinical authority in this room. I took 1 step toward the door, which had the effect of placing myself between him and Emma's bed. I would encourage you to leave. He laughed. I sat back down beside Emma and put my hand over hers, carefully, without waking her. I felt her pulse, steady and warm beneath my fingers. Outside the window, the January sky was beginning to lighten at its edges, pale gray softening toward white. Somewhere across the city, for people I hadn't spoken to in 10 years were already moving. Frank Dolan didn't knock. He never had. In 30 years of working together, across 4 continents and more situations than I could count cleanly, Frank Dolan had operated on the assumption that if a door was unlocked, it was an invitation, and if it was locked, he would find another way in. I heard the front door open at 12 minutes past 2 in the afternoon. I heard his boots on the hardwood floor of the entryway. And by the time he appeared in the kitchen doorway, I had already pulled a second mug from the cabinet. He looked the same as he always had. Broader maybe through the shoulders, and the gray in his hair had finished what it had started a decade ago. But the way he moved was unchanged. Measured. Deliberate. The walk of a man who always knew exactly where every exit was before he sat down. 55 years old, built like someone who had never entirely stopped being 28. He stood in the doorway and looked at me for a long moment. I looked back at him. Then he crossed the kitchen in 4 strides and put both arms around me with a force that drove the air out of my lungs. Frank Dolan was not a man who hugged people. In all the years I had known him, I could count on one hand the number of times he had offered that kind of contact to anyone. He held on for 3 full seconds, long enough that my throat tightened painfully and my eyes burned in a way I hadn't expected. Then he stepped back and took the coffee mug I was holding out to him without a word. He sat down at the kitchen table. I sat across from him. He looked at me over the rim of his mug with those steady gray eyes that had stared down things most people couldn't imagine without flinching. "Tell me everything," he said. So I did. I laid it out the way I had once laid out operational briefings. Clean, sequential, nothing omitted. The call from Harold, the bridge, the hospital, the 8 things I had read on Emma's body, Philip, the ring. Rex's confirmation about the research annex at Ridley Industrial Park. Frank listened without interrupting. His coffee went untouched. By the time I finished, his jaw was set in a line I recognized. The one that meant he was taking something apart in his mind and putting it back together in a shape he could work with. "The ring," he said. "That's not a standard corporate move. That's personal surveillance. Someone was afraid of her for a long time before they moved against her. Montgomery has been watching her research for longer than any of us knew," I said. Frank's hand tightened around his mug. His knuckles went briefly white before he released the pressure. "How is she?" "Exhausted. Frightened. Angry." I paused. "She didn't break." Something shifted in Frank's expression. Not quite a smile, but the nearest thing to it that Frank Dolan's face typically produced. "Of course she didn't," he said. "She's yours." The laptop on the counter chimed. I crossed the kitchen to open the video call. Rex Calloway's face filled the left half of the screen. Younger looking than his 48 years, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, 3 empty coffee cups visible on the desk behind him. Beside his window, Diane Cho's face filled the right half. Diane was 52, Korean-American, born and raised in Richmond, Virginia. She was the most precise financial analyst I had ever worked with. A woman who could follow a dollar through 17 shell companies across 4 jurisdictions and come out the other side holding a name and a date and a routing number. She was already frowning at something off-screen, which meant she had already found something she didn't like. "Daniel," Rex said by way of greeting. "The annex at Ridley Industrial Park is pulling 3 times the electrical load of an inactive facility. Somebody's running serious equipment in there. I've got a footprint consistent with BSL 2-level ventilation and filtration systems, plus what looks like a backup generator capacity that could run a mid-size hospital wing." He pulled off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "This is not a storage facility. This is an active research and containment site. Can you get me internal schematics?" I asked. "Already requested through a county permit database. I'll have them within the hour." I turned to Diane. "What did you find?" "Enough to make me angry," she said, which from Diane was the equivalent of anyone else slamming their fist on a table. Montgomery Med Group has been routing payments through 7 research entities incorporated in Delaware and Wyoming over the past 15 years. On paper, they're independent contractors. In practice, they share 3 registered agents, 2 of the same board members, and one accounting firm in Tyson's Corner that also handles the personal finances of the Montgomery family. She turned her second screen toward the camera. Columns of figures highlighted in red. In the past 18 months alone, there have been 14 payments totaling $940,000 to individuals listed as security consultants. I ran the names. 4 of them have federal records for extortion. 2 for assault. 1 for witness tampering. Frank set his coffee mug down on the table with a quiet, deliberate click. "They've done this before," he said. It wasn't a question. "At least 4 times that I can document," Diane said. "For researchers in 11 years who lost their positions, their funding, or their reputations within 6 months of declining to transfer work to Montgomery Med Group." One of them, she checked her notes. A Dr. James Whitmore from Johns Hopkins. Resigned abruptly in 2019, citing personal reasons. No further academic publications after that date. Prior to 2019, he had published 31 peer-reviewed papers. The other 3 names, Callister, Okafor, and a 5th case I'm still building. I'll walk you through everything tonight. I wanted Whitmore first because of his connection to Emma. The name hit me like something physical. My hand pressed flat against the kitchen counter to steady myself. Emma had talked about James Whitmore the way other people talked about the person who had fundamentally shaped how they understood the world. He had been her doctoral advisor. She had called him the reason she stayed in research when the funding dried up in her 3rd year and every practical instinct told her to find a more reliable path. He had told her that the work mattered more than the difficulty of doing it. He had lost everything because of the same people who had just left my daughter under a bridge in the January cold. Daniel. Diane's voice pulled me back. Her dark eyes were fixed on me through the screen with the particular kind of steadiness she deployed when she needed someone to stay operational. There's a 5th name. The records show a Dr. Samuel Reeves listed as deceased in 2018. Cardiac event, according to the county records. She paused. I can't find a death certificate. I can't find a funeral notice. I can't find a single obituary, a probate filing, or a hospital record of the event. Her voice dropped half a register. There is no documentation of this man's death anywhere that I can locate. Only the notation in a county database that no one would think to check unless they were already looking. Frank looked at me across the table. His eyes carried the same thought mine did. People don't vanish without a trace because they die. They vanish without a trace because vanishing is the only option left to them. I know that name, I said slowly. Reeves. I've seen it before. Not in connection with Montgomery. Something else. Years ago. I straightened up from the counter. Give me until tonight. I'll find out where he is. A knock at the front door. 3 quick, precise raps. Frank was already standing before the second one landed. That'll be Patricia, I said. Dr. Patricia Owens had driven up from her practice in Fredericksburg in under 2 hours, which told me everything I needed to know about how seriously she had taken my message. She came through the front door with a briefcase in one hand and her coat still half on, reading glasses hanging from the collar of her blouse. Her expression carried the focused displeasure of someone who had already assessed a situation and found it worse than advertised. I'd been to the hospital, she said before I could speak. I've reviewed Emma's admission records, conducted my own examination with her consent, and formally documented my findings as an independent forensic medical evaluation. She set her briefcase on the kitchen table and clicked it open. I've also filed paperwork designating myself as her consulting physician of record, which means that any attempt to transfer her to another facility now requires my written authorization as well as hers. She looked up at me. They sent a man with a Montgomery lanyard to her room this morning. I know, I said. I sent him away. He came back 20 minutes after you left, Patricia said. He didn't get past the nursing station. She pulled a manila folder from her briefcase and set it on the table between us. Daniel, the injuries on her wrists and the chemical traces on her clothing are consistent with a period of involuntary restraint in a controlled laboratory environment. I've documented all of it. This is enough for a search warrant application if we can get it in front of the right judge. Frank picked up the folder and opened it, his eyes moving quickly down the first page. Then he passed it across the table to me. I looked at the photographs Patricia had taken. Clinical, precise, shot under proper lighting. The marks on Emma's wrists looked starker in the photos than they had in the pale light of the hospital room. More undeniable. More like what they actually were. My chest felt as though something inside it was being wrung out slowly, with deliberate force. I breathed through it, closed the folder, and set it back on the table. Rex, I said, turning back to the laptop screen. How long for the schematics? 40 minutes, Rex said. Good. I looked around the table at Frank and Patricia, at Diane's face on the screen beside Rex's. 10 years. 10 years since I had sat in a room with these people and asked them to help me with something that mattered. The specific weight of that, the trust that had survived a decade of silence, pressed against the inside of my ribs in a way that made it hard to speak for just a moment. Thank you, I said. All of you. Frank picked up his coffee mug again. Stop thanking us and tell us what you need, he said. We have worked to direct Calloway could recover audio from a device that had been submerged, shattered, and left in the cold for 6 hours. I knew this because I had watched him do exactly that once, in a situation I was not permitted to document. He had sat at a folding table in a room with no windows and pulled coherent sound out of what looked like a handful of broken plastic and circuit board fragments. And when he played back what he had recovered, it had been enough to close a case that 3 agencies had been working on for 4 years. Emma's smartwatch was in better condition than that. Cracked screen, bent clasp, the kind of damage consistent with being removed forcibly from a wrist. Rex had it connected to his equipment within an hour of Patricia bringing it from the hospital, extracted from the personal effects bag the nursing staff had set aside when Emma was admitted. We were sitting around my kitchen table when he looked up from his laptop and said, I have something. Frank set down the schematic printouts he had been studying. Patricia looked up from her notes. I put both hands flat on the table. The watch has a passive audio monitoring function, Rex said, pulling off his reading glasses and setting them beside his keyboard. It's a security feature built into the model. When the onboard microphone detects sustained sound above 85 decibels, it begins recording automatically and stores the audio in an encrypted buffer. The idea is to capture evidence if the wearer is in danger. He paused. Emma never disabled it. Either she didn't know it was active, or she left it on deliberately. How long is the recording? I asked. 4 minutes and 17 seconds. He looked at me steadily. Daniel, I need to tell you before I play it. What you're about to hear is difficult. Play it, I said. Rex pressed a key. The first sound was a door. Heavy, with the particular resonance of a metal frame sealing against a pressurized threshold. The kind used in containment environments. Then footsteps on a hard floor, more than one set, moving at a pace that was unhurried and deliberate. Then Emma's voice. She wasn't crying. That was the first thing I registered. And the relief of it and the agony of it hit me simultaneously, because what her voice carried instead of tears was something that required far more from a person. A controlled, burning steadiness that I recognized because I had heard it in my own voice in rooms where I couldn't afford to break. "I've told you the answer," she said. Her voice was rough at the edges, strained in a way that told me she had been talking for a long time already. "The answer is no. It was no this morning, and it's no right now, and it will be no in an hour. You can keep asking." A man's voice answered. "Philip." Smooth, measured, with an undertone of irritation that he was working to keep out of his tone and not entirely succeeding. "Emma, this is not a negotiation anymore. The documents are prepared. The transfer is structured in a way that protects your contribution. Your name will appear in the acknowledgments. You'll receive a research stipend. Bar acknowledgments." Emma's voice cracked on the word, not with grief, but with something sharper. Something that had been compressed too long and was finding its way out through the edges of her composure. 5 years. 5 years of my life. My mother's illness pushed me into this field. "Philip, do you understand that I watched her go through treatment that cost more than my parents earned in 5 years? And I told myself that if I ever had the chance to make something that could help people who didn't have that kind of money." Her voice broke fully for just a moment. One sharp intake of breath that she crushed down before it could become something more. "I will not give it to you. I will not give it to anyone who was going to lock it behind a price that excludes the people who need it most." My hands pressed so hard against the table that my knuckles ached. Frank was sitting across from me with his forearms braced on the table and his jaw set so tight I could see the muscle working at the corner of it. Patricia had her hand pressed over her mouth. Philip said something else, lower, harder to make out. Something with the word consequences in it. Then a door opened again. Different footsteps this time. Lighter, more precise. A woman's walk, measured and purposeful. The walk of someone who didn't hurry because they had never needed to. Then a woman's voice filled my kitchen. It was calm. Perfectly, completely calm. The kind of calm that is not the absence of feeling, but the absolute mastery of it, shaped over decades into a tool. The voice of a woman who had stood in front of cameras and philanthropic boards and hospital dedication ceremonies and delivered exactly the right words in exactly the right tone for so long that warmth had become a technique rather than a quality. "She hasn't been uncomfortable enough," Catherine Montgomery said. "Increase the pressure. We're running out of time, and I will not allow a 20-minute delay to become a 24-hour one." The recording ended. The silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds before Frank shoved his chair back from the table and stood up. The chair scraped against the hardwood with a sound like something tearing. "Frank!" My voice came out lower than I intended, roughened by something I was fighting to keep contained in my chest. "Sit down. Daniel, sit down." I held his gaze across the table until he pulled the chair back and dropped into it, his shoulders rigid, his breathing audible. I understood. Every part of me that was a father rather than an analyst wanted to do exactly what Frank's instincts were telling him to do. "Get up. Move. Find something to put between that voice and my daughter. But instinct wasn't what was going to end this. That was Catherine Montgomery, I said, keeping my voice even. Not Philip. Not his father. Horror. The one who runs the foundation. The one who stands next to cancer patients at ribbon-cutting ceremonies and talks about hope, Patricia said. Her voice was flat and precise. The one who, she looked at me. She's the one running this. She was at the facility, I said. Which means she was also at the bridge. I looked at Rex. The GPS data from the ring. Can you overlay it against traffic camera coverage for the Ridley Creek Bridge access road? Rex was already typing. Give me 20 minutes. I stood up from the table. My legs felt heavier than usual, weighted by something that had no clean physical explanation. The specific gravity of hearing your child's voice refuse to break under pressure, and knowing what it had cost her to hold that line. I walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the street. Richmond in January. 9 o'clock at night. Porch lights on, a neighbor's dog moving through a yellow square of light from a front window. The quiet of a town where people believe the worst things happen somewhere else. Frank appeared beside me. He didn't put a hand on my shoulder or offer anything that could be called comfort. He just stood there, close enough that I could feel the solidity of him, and looked out at the same street. She didn't break, he said quietly. It was the same thing I had said to him earlier in the afternoon. He was giving it back to me now in the way Frank gave things. Without ceremony, without softening. Just the fact of it laid down like something that would hold weight. No, I said. She didn't. My phone buzzed on the table behind us. Diane's name on the screen. I crossed the kitchen and picked it up. Daniel. Diane said, and the particular edge in her voice made me go very still. Diane Cho didn't alarm easily. She had spent 30 years watching money move through the ugliest channels human beings had constructed, and very little of it had the power to put that note in her voice. I found something in the Montgomery financial records that you need to hear right now. Go ahead, I said. 20 years ago, she said, there was a federal investigation into a network distributing counterfeit medical equipment across Virginia and Maryland. The equipment was substandard. In some cases, actively dangerous. 6 patients experienced serious complications as a result. The lead investigator who came closest to building a case against the primary suspect was listed in the case file under the operational designation warden. The kitchen felt very quiet around me. Frank had gone still beside the window. Patricia's pen had stopped moving across her notepad. Even the ambient hum of the laptop seemed to fade into silence. Daniel, Diane said, and her voice was softer now, the voice she used when she was about to say something she knew would land like a blow. He knows who you are. He's known since the beginning. I set my phone down on the table and pressed both palms flat against the surface. The wood was cool beneath my hands, solid and unyielding. I focused on that sensation because it was something I could control, something that wouldn't move or change or reveal anything I wasn't ready to reveal. 20 years ago, I had been the lead investigator on a case that should have brought down Harlan Montgomery. A network of counterfeit medical equipment moving through distribution channels across Virginia and Maryland. Blood pressure monitors that read 15 points low. For flow regulators that delivered incorrect dosages. Surgical instruments with metal compositions that degraded under sterilization. The kind of equipment that didn't kill people immediately but created complications weeks or months later in ways that were difficult to trace back to a single point of failure. 6 patients had experienced serious complications. 2 of them were children. I had spent 14 months building that case. I had identified Harlan Montgomery as the primary source, a man who had used his medical supply subsidiary to move the counterfeit equipment through 3 layers of legitimate distributors, collecting margins at each step while keeping his own name far enough from the transaction chain to maintain plausible deniability. I had come close enough to see exactly how it fit together, could see the shape of the thing as clearly as I could see my own hands. And then a key witness had recanted. His name had been Thomas Brearley, a warehouse manager who had signed a detailed statement describing inventory procedures that directly implicated a Montgomery subsidiary. 12 days before the case was scheduled to go to a federal grand jury, Brearley had retracted every word of it. His attorney had filed the retraction on a Friday afternoon, which was the kind of timing that told you everything you needed to know about who had planned it. The case had been closed 6 months later due to insufficient evidence. I had never found out what they had used on Brearley. Money, most likely, or something more personal. The kind of pressure that didn't leave marks. Either way, by the time I had started pulling at that thread, I had been reassigned to something else, and the file had gone into a drawer, and Harlan Montgomery had walked away free. And he had apparently spent the next 20 years expanding his operation and making sure it was better insulated than it had been before. Daniel. Frank's voice came from beside the window. He had moved closer without me noticing. You need to tell us the rest. I looked up at him. His face was unreadable in the way it always was when he was processing something difficult, but his eyes were steady, waiting. 20 years ago, I said, I was the lead investigator on a case that should have sent Harlan Montgomery to prison. I had the evidence. I had the witness statements. I had a federal grand jury ready to indict. I paused, feeling the weight of the words as they left my mouth. Then Thomas Brearley recanted, and the case fell apart. Frank was silent for a moment. Then he said, and Montgomery knew who you were. He knew, I said. He knew my name, my designation, my methods. He had a file on me that was thicker than the case file I had on him. He studied everything I did. He knew how I worked, how I thought, how I approached investigations. And when the case collapsed, I went quiet. I moved to a small town, I took a different kind of job, I raised my daughter alone after Martha died. I thought I had left that world behind. I looked down at my hands, still pressed flat against the table. But he never forgot. He knew exactly who I was when Philip started pursuing Emma. He factored that into whatever calculation he made before he moved against her. Either he decided that the man I had been 20 years ago was no longer a threat to him, that 10 years of quiet life in a small town had made me soft enough and disconnected enough that I could be handled. Or he decided that the satisfaction of taking something from me specifically was worth whatever additional risk it introduced. The kitchen was silent except for the soft hum of the laptop and the distant sound of a car passing on the street outside. Patricia set her pen down carefully, as if any sudden movement might shatter something. Which one do you think it was? I don't know, I admitted. And I'm not sure which possibility makes me colder. Frank crossed the room and sat down across from me. His coffee had gone cold, forgotten on the table. He pushed it aside and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. So what do we do now? I looked at the schematics Rex had sent, spread across the table. The research annex at Ridley Industrial Park. The blueprints showed a building that was designed to be invisible, to blend into the industrial landscape, to appear inactive to anyone who wasn't looking closely. But the electrical load told a different story. 3 times the power consumption of a standard industrial facility. Ventilation systems designed for biosafety level 2 containment. A backup generator capable of running a mid-size hospital wing. Rex, I said, turning to the laptop screen. You said you're still narrowing down the exact location within the building. How much longer? Rex's face appeared on the screen, his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. The schematics show 3 possible containment zones on the 2nd floor. I'm cross-referencing with the electrical load data to see which one is pulling the most power. Give me another hour. I can get you more than that, Diane said, her voice cutting through the background of Rex's video feed. I've been going through the financial records from the Montgomery Foundation. There's a pattern that's been bothering me. She turned her second screen toward the camera, showing a series of spreadsheets highlighted in yellow and red. Over the past 8 years, the Foundation has made donations to 4 separate medical research institutions. Each donation was accompanied by a non-disclosure agreement that gave Montgomery Med Group first right of refusal on any resulting intellectual property. Which means they've been systematically acquiring rights to research before it's even completed, I said. Exactly. Diane's finger traced a line across the spreadsheet. But here's what's interesting. The donations stopped abruptly 18 months ago. At the same time, the Foundation started making direct payments to individual researchers rather than institutions. For researchers, all working on projects in the same therapeutic area as Emma's Alzheimer's research. She pulled up a new document. I've tracked the dates. Each of these 4 researchers received a visit from a Montgomery representative approximately 6 months before the payments stopped. Each of them declined a collaboration offer from Montgomery Med Group. And each of them experienced significant professional disruptions within 6 months of that refusal. Diane, I said slowly, are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying that Harlan Montgomery has been running a systematic campaign to acquire proprietary research through coercion and intimidation for at least the past 11 years. Her voice was flat, clinical, the voice of someone who had seen too much to be surprised by anything anymore. And I'm saying that Emma is not the first person he's done this to. She's just the first one who fought back hard enough that he had to escalate. Frank let out a long, slow breath. 11 years, he said. That's not opportunism. That's a system. It's a system, Patricia confirmed. And it's been running for over a decade. They've become very good at it. They know how to target vulnerable researchers, how to apply pressure in ways that are difficult to prove, how to destroy careers without leaving obvious fingerprints. And they've been getting away with it because no one has been able to connect the dots. No one until now, I said. Patricia looked at me across the table. Daniel, what are you planning to do? I looked at the blueprints, at Diane's spreadsheets, at the photographs of Emma's wrists. I thought about the 17 minutes of audio, the recording of Catherine Montgomery's voice, the message scratched on a wall in a locked room. I'm planning to dismantle it, I said. Piece by piece. Rex's voice came through the laptop speakers. I've got something. We all turned toward the screen. Rex had pulled up a security camera feed, grainy in black and white, showing the exterior of the Ridley Industrial Park building. "This is footage from the park's main entrance camera from 3 nights ago," he said. "Watch." The video played. A black SUV approached the gate at 11:47 p.m. The driver paused at the security checkpoint, held up a badge, and was waved through. The vehicle proceeded to Building 7 and entered the loading dock. "What am I looking at?" Frank asked. "Look at the driver's side window," Rex said. "Right before the vehicle enters the dock." He zoomed in, enhanced the image. Through the window, barely visible through the glare and the darkness, was a face. Catherine Montgomery. "She was there," I said. "She was at the facility the night before Emma was found." "Wait," Diane said. "There's more." She pulled up another document. I went back through the Montgomery Foundation's expense reports. There are 7 transactions to a car service company based in Ashland, Virginia. The company is listed as providing executive transportation for Montgomery Med Group employees. But here's the interesting part. The charges on those 7 transactions all occurred between midnight and 3 a.m. And the pickup and drop-off locations are both within half a mile of the Ridley Industrial Park. "She's been making late-night visits," Frank said. "Regularly. At least 7 times in the past 12 months, Diane confirmed. Every time, the trip is billed to the Montgomery Foundation, not Montgomery Med Group. Which means she was using foundation funds to pay for transportation to a facility that was supposedly inactive. She didn't want this showing up on the corporate expense reports." I leaned back in my chair and looked at the ceiling. The pieces were starting to come together, forming a pattern that was larger than I had initially understood. "Rex," I said. "The schematics show access points to the building. What are the security systems like?" "Standard commercial grade," Rex said. "Keycard entry on the exterior doors, motion sensors in the corridors, cameras at all main intersections. Nothing military grade." Montgomery seems to have believed that the building's inactive status was enough protection. "Then he was arrogant," Frank said. "He believed his own story." Ruth had a saying about men like Harlan Montgomery. She had said it once quietly on an evening when I had come home from work carrying the particular kind of exhaustion that came from spending a day inside someone else's capacity for cruelty. She had set a cup of tea on the table in front of me and sat down across from me and said, "The ones who think they are untouchable always make the same mistake. They start to believe their own story." Harlan Montgomery had believed his own story. He had believed it long enough and completely enough that he had reached for my daughter. That was his mistake. And unlike Thomas Brearley's retraction, unlike the 6 patients whose complications could not be traced, unlike the case that had gone into a drawer and stayed there, this one was not going to be closed without consequence. "Frank," I said. "How fast can you get a team together?" Frank's eyes sharpened. "What kind of team?" "A small one. People you trust. People who can move quietly and who understand that this isn't a standard operation." I paused. "I'm going to need eyes inside that building before we move."
"You want reconnaissance," Frank said. "I want to know exactly what we're walking into before we walk into it," I said. "I want to know where the doors are, where the windows are, where the security cameras are positioned, where the blind spots are. I want to know if there's a second exit, a loading dock, a basement access point that isn't on the schematics. You want to know what's in that building, and I want to know it before Harlan Montgomery has a chance to move anything out. Frank was already pulling out his phone. I know a few people who owe me favors. Give me 12 hours. I can give you 24, I said. But no more than that. After that, we'll be running on borrowed time. Frank nodded and stepped into the living room, his phone already pressed to his ear. His voice was low and measured, the voice of a man who had made these calls before. Patricia was watching me from across the table. Daniel, there's something else I need to tell you about Emma's condition. He looked at her. The expression on her face was careful, the expression of someone who had been holding back a piece of information until the right moment. Her blood work showed traces of a sedative compound that's not commonly used in clinical settings, Patricia said. It's a veterinary tranquilizer, typically used for large animals. It's not approved for human use, which means whoever administered it was either working outside standard medical protocols or had access to specialized pharmaceutical supplies. What does that mean? He asked, though I already knew. It means they had someone on their staff with pharmacological expertise, Patricia said. Someone who knew exactly what dosage to use to keep her sedated without causing permanent damage. It also means they've done this before. She met my eyes steadily. They had a protocol. This wasn't improvised. They had a system for restraining and sedating researchers who refused to cooperate. The room felt very cold, although the heat was running. He thought about Emma in that locked room, on the floor of the building that appeared to be inactive, with her wrists bound and her body sedated. I thought about Catherine Montgomery standing on the bridge, looking down at her, doing nothing to help. They're going to pay for this, I said. Every single one of them. Daniel, Patricia said carefully, I need you to be very clear with me about what you're planning to do. You need to know that you're not going to do anything that will put Emma at risk. He looked at her. Patricia Owens had been my friend for 30 years. She had delivered Emma when she was born. She had held my hand when we buried Martha. She had driven 2 hours in the middle of the night to examine my daughter's wrists and document the evidence of what had been done to her. She deserved the truth. I'm going to bring them down, I said. Legally. Properly. With evidence and warrants and a federal investigation that will leave them no room to escape. That's what I'm planning to do. He paused. But I'm going to do it before they have a chance to destroy the evidence. And I'm going to do it in a way that ensures they never do this to anyone else. Patricia studied me for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. All right. Then let's make sure we have everything we need. She pulled out her notebook and began writing. I'll contact a forensic pathologist I trust. We need to document every physical finding in a way that will hold up in court. The wrist marks, the chemical residue, the sedative compound in her blood. I want everything photographed, analyzed, and recorded before anyone has a chance to argue that it was contaminated. Chris' voice came through the laptop. I can help with the chain of custody documentation. I've got a protocol for digital evidence that's been admitted in federal court before. Good, I said. Then let's start building the case. Frank returned to the kitchen 10 minutes later. His expression was neutral, but there was something in the set of his shoulders that told me he had gotten what he needed. 3 people, he said. They'll be here within 12 hours. 2 are former military, 1 is former law enforcement. All of them are off the books and off the grid. They know how to move quietly and they understand the stakes. Good. He stood up from the table and walked to the window. Outside, the January night was dark and still. The streetlights cast pools of yellow light on the pavement, and a thin layer of frost was beginning to form on the grass. What about the surveillance equipment? I've got a contact who can get us high-end gear, Frank said. Drones, thermal imaging, audio capture. The kind of equipment that's usually reserved for military operations. It paused. It's not going to be cheap. Money isn't an issue, I said. I've got resources. I've been saving for a long time. Frank didn't ask questions. He simply nodded and made another call. Patricia left at 11:30 to return to the hospital. She wanted to check on Emma and make sure that no one else with a Montgomery lanyard had tried to get past the nursing station. He walked her to the door and thanked her for coming. Daniel, she said at the threshold, you need to get some sleep. You're not going to be any good to Emma if you're running on empty. I'll sleep when this is over, I said. She looked at me for a moment, then shook her head. You never were good at listening to medical advice. I learned that from you, I said. A faint smile crossed her face. Call me if anything changes. She walked down the front steps and got into her car. I watched her drive away, then closed the door and turned back to the kitchen. Frank was looking at the schematics spread across the table. He had opened the schematics and was studying them with the focus of someone who had spent decades reading blueprints and understanding what they meant. There's a service corridor on the west side of the building, he said without looking up. It's not marked on the main floor plan, but it's visible in the structural drawings. It runs from the loading dock to the basement level. It might be a way in that doesn't go through the main security checkpoints. He came to stand beside him and looked at the drawings. He was right. There was a narrow corridor, barely visible in the architectural details, that connected the loading dock to a stairwell that led to the basement. The stairwell was marked as a service access point for maintenance personnel. If the security cameras are positioned to cover the main entrances and corridors, they might not have coverage on that corridor, I said. It's a potential blind spot. Potential, Frank said. We'll need to confirm before we move. But it's a starting point. The laptop chimed. Chris' face appeared on the screen. I've finished analyzing the electrical load data, he said. The second floor, west wing. There are 3 rooms in that wing that are pulling significantly more power than any other part of the building. The largest draw is coming from a room at the end of the corridor, about 2/3 of the way down. He looked at the schematics. The room was marked as a conference room on the floor plan. It was approximately 15 by 20 feet, with no exterior windows and a single entrance. A conference room, I said, that's pulling as much power as a small medical facility. Exactly, Rex said. Which means it's probably not a conference room. It's a lab, or a containment room, or something else entirely. And it's in the same wing as the stairwell from the service corridor. Frank and I looked at each other. Rex, I said, can you access the building's security system? I can try, Rex said. The system is a standard commercial package. It's not designed to withstand a serious penetration attempt. Give me a few hours and I might be able to get you live feeds from the security cameras. Do it, I said. And send me the schematics for the service corridor. I want to study them tonight. The schematics appeared on my phone a few minutes later. He sat down at the kitchen table with a fresh cup of coffee and began to study them in detail. The night passed slowly. Frank slept on the couch in the living room, his breathing steady and even. I stayed at the kitchen table, studying the schematics and making notes on a legal pad. The service corridor was exactly as Frank had described. It ran from the loading dock on the south side of the building to a stairwell that led to the basement. The stairwell had doors at both ends, one that opened into the basement level, and one that opened onto the second floor. The second floor door was in the west wing, approximately 20 feet from the room that Rex had identified as the high-power draw. If I could get into that service corridor, I could access the second floor without going through the main security checkpoint. And if I could access the second floor, I could get to the room where Emma had been held. But the security cameras were still a concern. The schematics showed cameras at both ends of the corridor, and at the entrance to the stairwell. If those cameras were active and monitored, I wouldn't be able to move without being seen. Unless Rex could disable them. He made a note to discuss this with him in the morning. Then I set down my pen and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. The clock on the wall read 3:47 de la mañana. Outside, the January night was at its darkest, the sky a deep black punctuated by a few faint stars. The house was silent, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and Frank's steady breathing from the other room. He thought about Emma, lying in a hospital bed 2 miles away, waking up alone in a sterile room with the memory of what had been done to her. I thought about the look in her eyes when she had said, they wanted the formula, the Alzheimer's treatment. I thought about the 17 minutes of audio, the recording of Catherine Montgomery's voice, the calmness in it, the complete absence of remorse. And I thought about Harlan Montgomery, sitting in his executive office somewhere in the city, believing that he had won. Believing that his money and his power and his carefully constructed system would protect him from the consequences of what he had done. It was wrong. He stood up from the table and walked to the window. The frost on the grass was thicker now, glittering in the faint light from the street lamps. Somewhere out there, in the darkness of the industrial park, was a building that held the evidence of a crime that had been years in the making. And in just a few hours, I was going to go inside that building and find out exactly what Harlan Montgomery had been hiding. Frank woke at 5:30, his training overriding the fatigue that would have kept a normal person asleep for hours longer. He sat up on the couch, rubbed his face with both hands, and looked over at me still at the kitchen table. "You haven't slept," he said. It wasn't a question. "No," I said. I couldn't. He got up and walked to the coffee maker, his movements deliberate and unhurried. He poured 2 cups and brought one to the table, setting it in front of me. Then he sat down and looked at the notes I had made during the night. "The service corridor," he said. "You've found a way in." "I think so," I said. "If Rex can disable the cameras, I can get through the loading dock and into the corridor. The stairwell will take me to the second floor, and the room where Emma was held is about 20 feet from the second floor exit." Frank studied the notes for a moment longer. "What about the security patrols?" "The schematics show a single security guard on duty during the night shift," I said. "The patrol route is mapped on page 14. If we time it right, we can avoid him." "We," Frank said. He looked at him. "You don't have to do this, Frank. This isn't your fight." Frank set the coffee mug down and looked at me across the table. "He says we're steady," his face unreadable. "Emma is my goddaughter," he said. "I've known her since she was 3 years old. He was there when she learned to walk, there when she graduated from college, there when she started her research. And I was there when you got the call from that bridge. It paused. This isn't just your fight. It's mine too. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I nodded. All right, I said. Then let's plan this together. Rex's voice came through the laptop at 6:15 de la mañana. He had been working through the night, and his face showed it. The dark circles under his eyes were more pronounced than they had been, and his reading glasses were pushed up on his forehead in a way that suggested he had been too focused to notice them. I've got something, he said. The security system for the building is connected to an external monitoring service. The monitoring service is supposed to alert the Montgomery Med Group security team if any of the cameras are disabled or malfunctioning. That's a problem, Frank said. Not necessarily, Rex said. The monitoring service is a standard commercial provider. They use a unified platform for all their clients. If I can breach the platform's central server, I can redirect the alerts to a dummy account that won't raise any flags. How long will that take? He asked. 4 hours, maybe 5, Rex said. The platform is well designed, but it's not military grade. eBay's seen similar systems before. Do it, I said. And let me know the moment you're in. Rex nodded and his face disappeared from the screen. Frank and I spent the next few hours finalizing the plan. We reviewed the schematics, memorized the patrol routes, and identified 2 possible points of entry. We discussed contingencies for every scenario we could imagine: a security guard who was off route, a camera that wasn't disabled, a locked door that required a keycard we didn't have. By 8 de la mañana, we had a plan that was as solid as we could make it. This is still a huge risk, Frank said. I know, I said. But I'm not going to leave that evidence in Montgomery's hands for one more day. Every hour we wait is an hour he could use to destroy it. Frank was silent for a moment. Then he said, I'll meet you at the staging point at 9 de la noche. He stood up and walked to the door. He paused, his hand on the handle, and looked back at me. Daniel, he said. Make sure you're ready for whatever we find in that building. It might be more than you expect. I know, I said. I'm ready. He left. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after he was gone, staring at the schematics and the notes and the photographs of Emma's wrists. He thought about Harlan Montgomery and Catherine Montgomery and everything they had done. I thought about the research that Emma had spent 5 years building, and the patients who were waiting for it, and the price that Montgomery had been willing to pay to take it for themselves. And I thought about what I was going to do when I finally came face to face with them in that building. Then I stood up, walked to the bedroom, and lay down for a few hours of sleep before the night's work began. Rex's call came at 5:47 de la tarde. I'm in, he said. His voice was tired but triumphant. The central server is breached. eBay redirected all the security alerts to a dummy account. If any of the cameras in Building 7 are disabled, the monitoring service will send an alert to an address that I control. No one at Montgomery Med Group will know anything is wrong. And the cameras themselves? He asked. Can you disable them? I can disable individual cameras, Rex said. But I can't disable all of them at once without triggering a system-wide alert. You need to take them out one at a time, in a sequence that makes it look like a normal system glitch. How long will that take? Once you're inside the building, I can disable the cameras in your path as you approach them. But I'll need to be on the line with you the entire time. That's fine, I said. Ella have an earpiece. You can talk me through it. Rex nodded. I've also identified a secondary access point. There's a service door on the north side of the building that's not connected to the main security system. It's an old entrance that was sealed off when the building was renovated, but the schematics show it's still accessible from the outside. It opens into a storage room on the first floor. That's even better, Frank said. We can enter through the service door, avoid the loading dock entirely. The door is locked with an old mechanical lock, Rex said. It won't be easy to pick, but it's not electronic. There won't be any alert if it's opened. Frank looked at me. I know someone who can handle a mechanical lock. Good, I said. Then we have our entry point. At 8:30 de la noche, I left the house. The January night was cold and clear, the sky full of stars that looked sharp and distant. He drove to the staging point that Frank had identified, an abandoned gas station on the outskirts of the industrial park, a quarter-mile from Building 7. Frank was already there, along with the 3 people he had called. 2 men and 1 woman, all in their late 30s or early 40s, all with the alert, watchful posture of people who had spent years in dangerous places. Daniel, Frank said, making introductions. This is Marcus, Sarah, and Tom. They know the plan. He shook hands with each of them, meeting their eyes. They looked back at me with the steady, assessing gaze of professionals. Thank you for coming, I said. We appreciate the risk you're taking. Marcus, the oldest of the 3, shook his head. Frank said it was important. That's all we needed to know. Frank handed me a small earpiece. Rex is on the line. I'll be talking you through the entire operation. I inserted the earpiece and heard Rex's voice, clear and steady. I'm here, Daniel. eBay got the security feeds in front of me. Ready when you are. I looked at Frank, at Marcus and Sarah and Tom, at the dark outline of Building 7 in the distance. Let's Go service door was exactly where Rex had said it would be, on the north side of the building, partially hidden by a cluster of overgrown shrubs. Frank's lock-picking expert, Sarah, knelt in front of it and went to work with a set of tools she produced from her jacket. The lock was old, but it was stubborn, and it took her nearly 3 minutes to get it open. When she finally did, the door swung inward with a soft groan. Storage room, Rex said through the earpiece. You're clear. No cameras in that room. We moved inside, one by one, and closed the door behind us. The storage room was dark and dusty, filled with old equipment and boxes that had been there for years. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, but none of us turned it on. There's a door at the far end of the room, Rex said. It leads to the main corridor. There's a camera at the intersection, but I'll disable it when you're ready. We moved through the storage room and stopped at the door. Frank positioned himself beside it, his hand on the handle. Now, I said. Rex, do it now. There was a brief pause. Then Rex's voice, camera disabled. You have about 90 seconds before the system detects the anomaly and tries to reconnect. Mobe. Frank pulled the door open and we moved into the corridor. It was empty and silent, the walls painted in the institutional gray of a building that had been designed to be unremarkable. Stairwell to your left, Rex said. Service corridor entrance is at the end of the next hallway. You need to pass one more camera. Disable it, I said. Already done. You have 70 seconds. We moved quickly, our footsteps echoing softly in the empty corridor. Frank led the way, his movements fluid and silent. Sarah and Tom followed, their eyes scanning the shadows. Marcus brought up the rear, watching our back. We reached the service corridor entrance without incident. The door was marked with a faded sign that read "Authorized personnel only." Frank pulled it open and we stepped inside. The service corridor was narrow and dark, barely wide enough for two people to walk side by side. The walls were concrete, unpainted, and the floor was dusty. A single fluorescent light flickered at the far end. "The stairwell is at the end of this corridor," Rex said. "Once you reach it, you'll need to go up one flat to the second floor. The door at the top opens into the west wing, 20 feet from the room you're looking for." We moved through the corridor, our senses alert for any sound, any sign that we had been detected. But there was nothing except the dim hum of the flickering light and the echo of our own footsteps. "Camera at the stairwell entrance," Rex said. "Disabling it now. You have 60 seconds. We reached the stairwell door and Frank opened it. The stairwell was dark and smelled of concrete and dust. We moved up the stairs, one flight, our footsteps careful and controlled. At the top, Frank paused at the door and listened. "Clear," he said. He opened the door a crack and looked through. The corridor is empty. No movement. We stepped through the door and onto the second floor. The west wing was quiet and dimly lit, the overhead lights set to a low nighttime level. The corridor stretched ahead of us, lined with closed doors. "The room is at the end," Rex said. "The door is locked with an electronic keypad. You can disable the lock remotely, but you'll need to be ready to move as soon as I do." We moved down the corridor, staying close to the walls. At the end, we stopped in front of a door that looked identical to all the others. But this one, I knew, was different. This was the room where Emma had been held. "Ready," I said. "Disable the lock." There was a soft click from the door. Frank pushed it open and we moved inside. The room was small, maybe 10 by 12 feet, with a single overhead light that cast harsh shadows on the walls. The walls were painted a dark blue, the same shade that Emma had described, the same shade that I had found under her fingernails. In the corner of the room, there was a chair, bolted to the floor. The arms of the chair had padded restraints, the kind that left marks on wrists. On the wall, at approximately the height of a seated person's reach, there were marks in the paint. A small, deliberate, made with something narrow. They formed a pattern. 3 short marks, 2 long marks, 3 short again. I felt my throat close. When Emma was 7 years old, I had taught her a navigation system. A simple mark she could leave on tree bark or fence posts or the corners of buildings that would tell me 2 things, which direction she had gone, and that she was still moving under her own power. The 323 pattern meant I was here. I'm not lost. Come find me. She had remembered. After 25 years, she had remembered. "Frank," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Look at the wall." Frank came to stand beside me and looked at the marks. It was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "She knew you would find it." "Yes," I said. "She knew I would come. She knew I would come." The words hung in the air of that small, dark room like something solid, something that could be touched. Frank stood beside me, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the marks on the wall. Being US, Sarah and Tom were already moving through the room, their flashlights sweeping across the floor, the walls, the corners. Marcus was at the door, watching the corridor. Daniel, Rex's voice came through the earpiece. I've got movement on the security cameras. Someone just entered the building through the main entrance. Mali, mid-50s. It looks like Harlan Montgomery himself. My blood went cold. How long until he reaches this floor? 3 minutes, maybe 4. Is moving slowly, checking rooms as he goes. He might be looking for something. He's looking for us, Frank said. Or he's looking for evidence. Either way, we need to move. I looked around the room one more time. The marks on the wall, the chair with the restraints, the dark blue paint. This was where they had held Emma. This was where she had left her message for me. Take photographs of everything, I said. Every mark, every piece of evidence. We need documentation. Sarah was already pulling out a small camera, moving methodically through the room. Tom was examining the chair, looking for fibers or other trace evidence. Frank was at the window, looking down at the parking lot below. The SUV is here, Frank said. He didn't come alone. There is a driver waiting in the vehicle. Rex, I said. Can you tell me where Catherine Montgomery is? A pause. Then Rex's voice, I don't see her on the cameras. She might not be in the building. But there's something else. He just detected a signal from the basement level. Someone is in the basement, moving around. He can't tell who it is. The basement, Frank said. That's where the service corridor leads. That might be where they're keeping the documents. Or where they're trying to destroy them, I said. We need to split up. Frank, you and Marcus go to the basement. Find out who's down there and what they're doing. Sarah, Tom, you stay here. Document everything. Y ella handle Harlan. Frank looked at me. Daniel, that's not a good idea. You can't face him alone. I'm not going to face him, I said. I'm going to talk to him. And I'm going to record every word he says. He pulled a small recording device from my pocket and showed it to Frank. This is already running. Everything that happens in this building from now on is being recorded. Frank studied my face for a moment. Then he nodded. All right. But if you're not back in 30 minutes, I'm coming for you. You won't need to, I said. I'll be fine. He left the room and walked down the corridor toward the main stairwell. My footsteps were steady, unhurried. He wanted to appear calm, in control. He wanted Harlan Montgomery to see me and wonder what I knew. He reached the stairwell and started down. Halfway to the first floor, I heard footsteps below me. He stopped and waited. Harlan Montgomery came around the corner and saw me standing on the stairs. He stopped, his hand going to his jacket. He knew he was reaching for a weapon. Mr. Montgomery, I said, keeping my voice even. I've been hoping to talk to you. He stared at me, his face a mask of controlled anger. You, he said. You're the father. The retired investigator. The one who couldn't let go. Couldn't let go, I repeated. That's an interesting choice of words, Mr. Montgomery. Because from where I'm standing, it seems like you're the one who can't let go. 20 years ago, you walked away from a federal investigation. You thought you'd won. But you never stopped looking over your shoulder, did you? He didn't answer. His hand was still on his jacket, his eyes fixed on me with a cold intensity. I know what you did to Emma, I said. I know about the restraints, the sedatives, the room at the end of the second-floor corridor. I know about Catherine's visit to the bridge. I know about the 4 researchers who came before Emma. I know about Thomas Brearley and the recanted testimony. Harlan's face shifted. The mask of anger cracked, just slightly, revealing something underneath. Surprise, maybe. Or fear. You don't know anything, he said. You're a retired nobody who can't accept that his daughter is unstable. My daughter is not unstable, I said, and my voice was harder now, the voice of the man I had been 20 years ago. My daughter is a brilliant researcher who refused to give you what you wanted. And you, M.R. Montgomery, are a thief and a bully who has been getting away with it for far too long. He took a step closer to him, and he took a step back. His hand came out of his jacket, empty. He had decided not to reach for the weapon. You think you can threaten me, he said. You have no evidence. You have no case. Everything you think you know is hearsay and speculation. I have photographs, I said. I have audio recordings. You have the testimony of 4 researchers who you tried to destroy. And I have the marks my daughter left on the wall of that room, marks that can be matched to her fingerprints. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. And I have this. He held up the phone so he could see the screen. It showed a live feed from the security camera in the room where Emma had been held. Sarah and Tom were still there, documenting everything. What is this? Harlan demanded. What are you doing? I'm documenting, I said. Every room, every piece of evidence, every mark on the wall. By the time I'm done, M.R. Montgomery, there won't be a single detail of your operation that isn't recorded and preserved for federal prosecutors. Harlan's face went white. His eyes darted to the door behind him, calculating his options. Then he looked back at me, and something shifted in his expression. The fear was still there, but it was being pushed aside by something else. Something older and more dangerous. You think you've won, he said quietly. You think you can destroy everything I've built. But you don't understand. You don't understand what I'm doing or why. Then explain it to me, I said. Tell me why you've spent 11 years destroying researchers and stealing their work. Harlan laughed, a short, bitter sound. Because the system is broken. Because the research that could save lives is locked behind bureaucratic walls and patent disputes and endless delays. Because I'm the only one who has the resources to make a difference. And the patients? He asked. The people who were harmed by your counterfeit equipment? The researchers whose careers you destroyed? What about them? Harlan shook his head. Collateral damage. Necessary sacrifices. You of all people should understand that, Warden. The word hit me like a blow. I knew. I had known all along. I've been studying you for 20 years, Harlan said. I know your methods, your weaknesses. I know you care too much. And I know that caring too much is what will destroy you. I don't think so, I said. I think caring too much is what's going to save me. He pressed a button on my phone. Rex, send the signal now. A moment later, a siren began to wail in the distance. The federal marshals were on their way. Harlan stared at me, his face a mask of disbelief. What have you done? I've done what I should have done 20 years ago, I said. I've called in the cavalry. The sirens grew louder, closer. In the basement, I knew Frank and Marcus were securing evidence. In the second-floor room, Sarah and Tom were documenting every detail. And here, on the stairwell, I was looking at the man who had tried to destroy my daughter. It's over, Mr. Montgomery. It's been over since the moment you put my daughter in that room. You just didn't know it. Harlan opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He says we're fixed on the door behind me, where the sound of running footsteps was growing louder. The federal marshals burst through the door. Frank was with them. Harlan Montgomery, the lead marshal said. You are under arrest for kidnapping, assault, conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice. Harlan didn't resist. He stood there, his face frozen, as the marshals handcuffed him and read him his rights. He didn't look at me. He didn't say a word. Frank came to stand beside me. We found everything, he said quietly. The basement was full of documents. Financial records, research data, everything. Catherine Montgomery? I asked. She wasn't there. But we found evidence of her involvement. The financial records show she was the one funding the operation. Harlan was just the front. He nodded. We'll find her. It's only a matter of time. Frank looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, You did it. You really did it. We did it, I said. All of us. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal proceedings, media attention, and the slow, grinding process of justice. Harlan Montgomery was arraigned and denied bail. Catherine Montgomery was arrested at an airport in Maryland, trying to flee the country with a suitcase full of cash. The evidence we had gathered was more than enough to secure convictions. The photographs, the recordings, the financial records, the testimony of the 4 researchers who had come before Emma, all of it was presented to the grand jury. The indictments were delivered on a Tuesday in March. Emma's recovery was slow but steady. She spent 2 weeks in the hospital, then another month recovering at home. He stayed with her every day, making sure she had everything she needed. One evening, about 6 weeks after the arrest, we were sitting in my living room, watching the sunset through the window. Emma was drinking tea, her hands wrapped around the mug to keep them warm. Dad, she said quietly. I want to thank you. For everything you did. He looked at her. She had color in her cheeks now, and her eyes were bright. The dark circles that had been there in the hospital were gone. You don't need to thank me, I said. I'm your father. It's what fathers do. She smiled, a small, tired smile. I know. But I still want to say it. Thank you. For coming for me. For not giving up. For being the person you are. He reached over and took her hand. I was never going to give up, I said. Not then, not now, not ever. She squeezed my hand and looked at me with eyes that held something I hadn't seen in a long time. Opie. What happens now? She asked. Now, I said, we move forward. You finish your research. You help the patients who are waiting for your treatment. And I help you, in whatever way I can. That sounds good, Emma said. That sounds perfect. On a warm afternoon in June, I was sitting on the front porch when Frank's truck pulled into the driveway. He got out and walked up the path, a folder under his arm. "I have something for you," he said. We sat on the porch, and he handed me the folder. Inside was the final report from the federal investigation. Harlan and Catherine Montgomery had both been sentenced to 20-year prison terms. The researchers whose work had been stolen were being offered financial restitution. And the Montgomery Foundation was being dissolved. "It's done," Frank said. "It's finally done." He closed the folder and looked out at the street. The sun was warm on my face, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the sound of children playing. "Yeah," I said. "It's done." Frank and I sat on the porch for a long time, not saying anything. But words weren't necessary. So many things, I have learned, speak for themselves. The summer passed quietly after that. Emma continued her research, working from home while she recovered. The patient access program she had envisioned was finally becoming a reality, funded in part by the assets seized from the Montgomery Foundation. I spent my days doing the things I had always done. Walking the neighborhood, visiting Martha's grave, fixing the clock above the stove. So many things, I realized, never really change. And some things, the things that matter most, are worth protecting no matter what. In September, Emma completed the first phase of her clinical trials. The results were promising. The treatment she had developed, the one the Montgomerys had tried to steal, was proving effective. Patients were getting better. He got a call from Patricia on a cool September morning. "Daniel, you should see this," she said. He turned on the television. There was Emma, standing at a podium, wearing the green blazer Martha had given her. She was speaking to a room full of reporters, her voice steady and calm. "This treatment belongs to the patients," she was saying. "It belongs to the people who need it. And I will never, ever let anyone take it away from them." He watched the rest of her speech with tears in my eyes. Ruth would have been proud. He knew that. Later that evening, Emma came to the house. She was carrying a small box, wrapped in brown paper. "I found this in the back of my closet," she said. It was in a box of Mom's things that I never really went through. She set the box on the kitchen table and opened it. Inside was a small leather journal, worn and faded. Emma picked it up and opened it. "It's Mom's handwriting," she said softly. She began to read. "My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, then I'm no longer here to tell you this myself. But I want you to know something. I have always known you were meant for great things. From the moment I held you in my arms, I knew you had a strength in you that would carry you through anything life threw at you. I know you will face challenges. I know there will be people who try to hold you back, who try to steal from you what you have worked so hard to build. But I want you to remember this: you are stronger than any of them. You are braver than any of them. And you have a Father who will move heaven and earth to protect you. Never doubt that. Never doubt Him. And never doubt yourself. With all my love, Mom." Emma closed the journal and looked at me, tears streaming down her face. She knew, she whispered. She knew what was coming. He crossed the kitchen and put my arms around my daughter. "She always knew," I said. "She knew you." We stood in the kitchen for a long time, Emma and I, holding on to each other the way we had when she was small and the world had seemed too big and frightening. The journal lay open on the table between us, Martha's words still hanging in the air like a blessing. Emma finally pulled back and wiped her eyes. I never knew she wrote this, she said. I never knew she was thinking about things like that. About what might happen to me. I looked at the journal, at the familiar handwriting that I hadn't seen in years. Your mother always saw things other people didn't see. She saw the future. She saw you. And she saw what you were capable of long before anyone else did. Emma picked up the journal and held it close to her chest. I'm going to keep this forever, she said. I'm going to read it whenever I forget who I am. He smiled at her. You won't forget who you are, Emma, not anymore. Not after everything you've been through. She nodded slowly. No, she said. He won't they. You made sure of that. The fall came and went. Emma's research continued to progress, and the patient access program was expanding to include more people. The foundation that had been built on the ashes of Montgomery Med Group was something entirely new, something that Emma had created with her own hands and her own vision. I helped what I could, but mostly I just watched. I watched my daughter become the woman she was always meant to be. I watched her stand up to the world and refuse to back down. And I watched her heal, piece by piece, day by day. Frank came by on Thanksgiving, as he always did. He brought a bottle of whiskey and a story about a case he had worked on years ago, one that had never quite been resolved until now. Diane and Rex joined us via video call, their faces filling the laptop screen as we ate dinner together across 400 miles. Patricia came too, her medical bag replaced by a casserole dish. We sat around the table and we talked about everything and nothing, the way families do. At the end of the evening, Emma stood up and raised her glass. I want to say something, she said. The room went quiet. 6 months ago, I was lying under a bridge in the January cold, not sure if I was going to survive. He didn't know if anyone would find me. He didn't know if anyone was coming. But I knew my father would come. He knew he would never stop looking for me. And I was right. She looked at me, and her eyes were bright with tears that she didn't bother to hide. He came for me. He brought all of you with him. And together, you saved my life. Not just the physical part of it. You saved everything. My work, my hope, my belief that the world is worth fighting for. She raised her glass higher. To Dad. To Frank. To Diane, Rex, Patricia. To everyone who stood with us when it mattered most. We all raised our glasses. To family, I said. Everyone echoed it. After everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, I sat alone in the kitchen with the journal open in front of me. I read Martha's words again, the words she had written for Emma, words she had never gotten to say aloud. I thought about all the years I had spent keeping secrets, building walls, trying to protect my daughter by keeping her at a distance. I had been wrong. Not about loving her, not about wanting to protect her. But about how to do it. The truth was simpler than I had ever imagined. You protect the people you love by being with them. By showing up. By telling them the truth, even when it's hard. By letting them see who you really are. He closed the journal and looked out the window at the winter sky. Somewhere out there, my daughter was sleeping in her own home, safe and whole and ready for whatever came next. And I knew, in a way I hadn't known in years, that everything was going to be all right. If this story has taught me anything, it's that family isn't always about blood. It's about the people who show up when you need them most. It's about the Frank Dolans of the world, who come running when you call. The Rex Calloways, who work through the night to find the truth. The Diane Chas, who follow the money and never let go. The Patricia Owenses, who drop everything to be there for you. And it's about the Emma Crosses of the world, who refuse to break, no matter what. The people who hold on to hope even when everything seems lost. I waited 12 years to tell my daughter the truth about who I really was. I thought I was protecting her. I was wrong. Do not make my mistake. Tell the people you love who you really are. Not because you have to, but because they deserve to know. Because say the truth, even when it's hard, is the only thing that can set you free. Justicia does not always come quickly. It does not always come easily. But if you fight for it, if you refuse to let go, if you surround yourself with people who believe in the same things you do, it will come. It may take 20 years, but it will come. And when it does, it will be worth every moment of the wait. Thank you for staying with me through this entire story. Thank you for being here, for listening, for caring. Your presence means everything to me, and I hope this story has reminded you of something important. The people who matter most are worth fighting for. Always. If this story moved you, please take a moment to drop a comment below. Tell me what city or country you're watching from. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Until next time, take care of each other. Take care of yourselves. And never stop fighting for the people you love.